Let's kick off. No one writes alone. So here's the background if you haven't read it in the program. There's a reason that you've heard this proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, because when the kid gets the benefit of a larger community, he or she is all the better for it. And the parents get some help along the way. So the same advice applies for raising a novel from infancy to publication. When writing for a specific community, you go for it. Your your go of it will be easier, and your book will be better if you lean on others in your community rather than trying to take it solo. Our panelists will share with us how they've relied on their communities for support and insight, how they benefited from that, and then return the favor in kind as active participants trying to pay it forward for the good of their entire village. All right. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce today's glorious panelists. You guys can come off of what's the word? You can bring yourself back on video and audio if you're ready. All right. So today we have Adam Sass, Kelly Quindlen, and Jacinta Howard. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I'm really excited to kick this conversation off with you. All right. So, just to break the ice here, I would love it if each of you could just introduce yourself. Just give us the mid-movie montage version of your journey as an author, so that people can have some more context, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Adam, I saw you first. Let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Sass. I'm the author of Surrender Your Sons, which you can see behind me here. This is my debut last year. It's a young adult thriller, but I've got another young adult coming out next fall that is a romantic comedy. So right now I'm in the young adult space, whether scary or comedic. So my journey to becoming published was yeah, fairly serpentine, and it took about maybe 6 or 7 years. So I feel like I like to say that Surrender Your Sons was rejected about 110 times before it was finally bought between agents and editors. And so it's one of those things where I feel like I've definitely done a lot of the hard yards of I've taken some of the longer routes around this business. But yeah, I came to it from a screenwriting background. So when I turned 30, I decided to change businesses, and absolutely was one of the best choices I could have made.
Awesome, awesome. Kelly, looks like you're on mute there.
Every time, right?
Classic
Um,
Zoom.
I'm Kelly. I'm the author of 3 books. The most recent one was She Drives Me Crazy, which came out this past April, which is also young adult, like Adam's. Before that, I had Late to the Party. These were my two pandemic books that came out April 2020 and April 2021. Yay. And they're both published by Macmillan. And then I self-published my first novel back in 2014. That one is called Her Name in the Sky. So my publishing journey has been interesting because I started with self-publishing and then decided to pursue traditional publishing. And after I decided to pursue the traditional route, it took me probably 3 years to finish my second manuscript and sign with an agent.
Okay. Excuse me, Jacinta.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Jacinta Howard, and I published my first book independently in 2014. It's called Better Than Okay. I write contemporary romance and new adult romance, and I am independently published. Prior to publishing my first book, I have been a journalist and still am for about 20 years to age myself. Um, so I write in that space as well. I do a lot of like culture and entertainment writing. And so, like I said, I've always wanted to write a book. So I did that, and I've since published about 10 books independently. The most recent one, well, this one just came out on audio. It's called The Night Before. So I just, like I said, published that one on audio. And then I do have a audio publishing deal for one of my series. And so yeah, so that's me.
Awesome, awesome. And we are waiting for one more of our panelists to arrive here. Just running a little bit behind. So I guess I can introduce myself. Not that anybody needs to know all that much about me. I'm Daniel Lamb. I am on the board here at Broadleaf Writers Association. First and foremost, really excited to facilitate this conversation. Community in writing is something that's very important to me, and all the people here on the board. Benjamin Carr and I, we run a small online literary magazine called Gut Wrench Journal, and it's community is a big value of ours. So I'm just really happy to be talking about this from all these angles with you guys today. Jessica is posting about me in the chat here. I also run a Facebook group that's designed to support community development and artistry. So we serve writers, actors, musicians. It's a free group on Facebook, and we also have a podcast called Artist Inclusive. We've interviewed some people from this community, and we've interviewed people from the greater arts community in Atlanta and nationally. And it's just a lot of fun to talk about the journey of going pro and the mindset and all that good stuff. So now that Deesha is here, thank you for joining us. Deesha, we are just going around the room and introducing ourselves before we jump into the conversation. So welcome.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late.
No worries. Deesha, can you give our guests just like a quick overview of who you are and what you do, and like the mid-movie montage of your writer's life?
Let's see. I'm a native of Jacksonville, Florida, living in the hinterlands of Pittsburgh since 1997. I'm the author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which is a collection of 9 short stories about Black women, sex, and the Black church.
That sounds amazing. I want to read it now. Okay, so let's jump into our conversation. So just sort of as a precursor to getting deeper into this, I'd love to hear from you guys about, how did you start your journey as a writer? Were you initially plugged into any type of community, or did you have to find that as you sort of worked your way into it and grew?
I'll start. I think it was this was sort of my the writing community on, I'll just say, social media. I started on what do you call kind of book Twitter back in 2014 when I really started in earnest kind of going for this thing, which I was, I think, just sort of meeting people and knowing people, and not just online too, but like going to different writing conventions. Lived in LA, and I went to the LA Times Festival of Books, and which would be in the spring, and then Y'all West was out there as well. And so kind of really sort of building those relationships, which were really important because I moved from screenwriting into publishing, but I did so not, just sort of going in. I started querying very cold. Like I didn't go through, I didn't, come to events like these first. I just started doing it because at that time I was like, I'll just do it, and probably could have saved myself many years of trial and error had I just kind of maybe a little more finesse ahead of times. But the writing community is really kind of what helped hone, my skills, and just through knowing different people and having their feedback and having them kind of say like, well, this is something you should probably focus more on, and then focus less on these things. So yeah, I was in a writing community for probably several years before I felt legitimately as if they were my peers. But the cool thing about that is that they always treated me like a peer. And that is kind of the truth, whether you're sort of pre-published or currently published. If you're writing, you're a peer of all of us. So I think that's kind of a really important thing to kind of keep in mind, because your sort of self-confidence is going to be really your best weapon kind of going forward as you get into the muck of trying to get published.
Thank you. Kelly, what's your experience with that?
I came at this a little bit in reverse, I think. I pursued writing in a very solitary way, and I also cold queried. And it wasn't until I was kind of more into the process. It was after I had published Her Name in the Sky in 2014. And that's when I started finding my peers on mostly book Twitter. And the most fruitful relationship I have is with my friend Adrienne Tooley, who just direct messaged me on Twitter after she read my first book and made a joke about how I owed her a box of tissues because she was crying a lot through it. And she said she was also a writer, and she also wrote young adult LGBTQ. So we started trading work, and that was the first time I really had one of those nourishing friendships. I really respected her work. I felt challenged by it. I always think of that kind of dynamic of like Lennon McCartney, right? They were both very, very good at what they did, and they pushed each other to be better. And that's kind of what I look for with writing friends is people. There's writing friends who you like enjoy talking to, and then there's writing friends, at least this is how I see it, who you really truly trust. And I keep that group very small in terms of being beta readers and people I bounce ideas off of. I don't open my work up to like a whole bunch of people. So I feel like I'm kind of telling this story all over the place. But long story short, I found other YA LGBTQ writers on Twitter and nourished those relationships slowly. And they came about very organically. And then I also participated in Pitch Wars a few years ago as a Pitch Wars mentor. And I met more people that way too. And one thing Adam said that I wanted to piggyback off of was this idea that I don't know how everyone else feels, but I find that when you go to a writing group, whether it's online or in person, it can be a very egalitarian space, assuming you don't have any assholes there. But I do think that you should harness that self-confidence and treat everyone in the group like an equal, no matter whether they've hit the New York Times bestseller list or whether they're on their first draft of their first book ever. Because when you distill this, a writer is simply somebody who writes. And so if you are if you're doing that verb, if you are doing the actual writing, you're a writer. And that's kind of my criterion for calling somebody a peer. If they're also actively writing, they are my peer.
Awesome. 100%. I have to agree there. Jacinta.
Yeah, so I agree with what Adam and Kelly both said. My experience was, like I said, I started off in journalism, excuse me. And so I had a writing community somewhat, but it's very, very different when you're writing like novels. It's a completely different world. And I naively kind of thought that my journalism writing world would follow me over to the book writing world, and that just did not happen. So I really ended up like fostering a whole new community, and it came about very organically. I'm pretty introverted. I'm not like the hurrah, hey person. So everything for me has to really be organic to feel real. And so I actually just, when I finished my first book, I went to Goodreads and I just kind of scrolled and found people who read things that I thought were similar to what I had written. And I asked them if they would read my book for nothing. I just wanted them to read it. And I actually, one of the women that I asked, she ended up running a Facebook group. I did not know this at the time. That was really tapped into the Black indie romance community. And that's how I got introduced to it. I didn't even know that it was a community but it's huge and it's very, very tight knit. So that was my introduction, just that organic kind of, situation that happened. And I met a couple of writers who I, became pretty good actual friends with. And we started a writing group. It's actually more like a reader writer group. We've done a few events. And then that, like I said, just kind of spread out from there, because the community really is pretty tight knit. And it is very, it's very encouraging. It doesn't matter, again, like what level you're at, what, if you're a brand new writer, if you've, hit a couple of bestsellers lists, if you're hybrid, whatever the situation is, it's very, very welcoming in a way that I wasn't used to, honestly. And so yeah, so that's how I started kind of getting into the communities that I'm in. Yeah.
And Deesha, what about you?
So I'm thinking about what Kelly said. I started writing really in a solitary way. And at this point, it's over 20 years ago. That's how long ago it was. And I was a stay-at-home mom living in the suburbs with a toddler who didn't nap. And so writing for me was like the thing I did to escape every day for 30 minutes. Or try to escape at least. And so it was very solitary for a while. And then there were a couple of women at the church that I attended at the time. And it was almost like a secret, like, oh, I write too, and so then we started branching out to, one night a week, we would get together and share our writing with each other. And then when I left that particular church community and I moved into the closer into the city of Pittsburgh, my world changed, and I was closer into the part of the city where writers live and other artists live. And but I was still mostly writing, and keeping things sort of to myself, not really sure how to get published. And not sure who to ask. And I saw a flyer for a women's writing conference, and I was working on a novel at that time. And so I went, and that was a great opportunity to build community. And I was having lunch with one of the other attendees, and I said, I want to write, I want to connect with other writers, but I don't know any, outside of the people I'm meeting here. And she says, there's got to be some writer in your area that you admire, somebody. And it was a newspaper columnist and editor named Tony Norman. And she said, oh, I know Tony, he's a great guy, send him an email. And I wrote the dorkiest email ever, like, dear Mr. Norman, I want to be a writer, I don't know what to do, or something really embarrassing. But that was 20 years ago, and Tony became my mentor. He's still a dear friend, and he was the first person to be a reader for me, and to and he's old school journalist, so he printed it out and he hand marked it. And that lesson for me was, sometimes what we want from community is for people to say that it's good and to validate us and tell us we're a real writer, but the gift is when they give you more than that and they tell you how to make it good, or if it's good, how to make it better. So that experience with Tony kind of started me on this path of continued dorkiness, where I would read a book and then figure out how to contact the writer and send them fan mail and then ask them, like, I want advice, what can you tell me? And writers would write me back. That's the thing that I think people might be surprised to learn, like even in the early 2000s, if you could find a contact form or email address, there were writers that would write you back and give you good advice. But I was desperate to get published. And that's, I think that was sort of the blessing and the curse, that I had that hunger, but it was kind of, for me, the hunger for the wrong thing. And one of the writers I wrote to was Deborah Dickerson. And she gave me the best advice ever, which was stop worrying about getting published and worry about getting better at writing. And so I was like, okay. And so, but in my, I want to publish somewhere frenzy, I was writing fiction, but I saw this opportunity to become a columnist at a site called Literary Mama. And so personal essay, nonfiction, totally different world, but I applied and I got the gig, and I was a columnist there for 4 years. And that was my first real writing community. Each columnist was, we wrote a piece each month. We had 2 editors assigned to us for our work. And then the other, 11 or 12 columnists, we would be each other's readers if you had time. It was kind of informal. And so I learned so much about writing in general by reading other people's work and investing my time and energy in that columnist community. And so, for 4 years, I was really fortunate. I had 2 editors plus, 10 other writers, wonderful writers, looking at my work on a regular basis. And then from there, I kind of branched out. And I predate Twitter. I think I might be the oldest person here. I'm 50 years old. So some of my writer friends, we were blogging back then in the parenting space and in other spaces. And so my friend Tamara Winfrey Harris, who is now, I think, on her third book, we connected around blogging. And we became each other's early readers. And so to this day, she's still the person that, I send things to. And that community continues to expand as, as my work is more out in the world and just connecting with other writers and that sort of reciprocal relationship between, asking someone to read and give you feedback and then having the time to also do the same for them. And as Kelly said, knowing, who the writers are that are kind of like your cheerleaders, and then who are the ones that are really going to be honest with you and give you feedback that's helpful to help you grow as a writer.
May I add a comment to that? To what Deesha is saying, because it has to be a reciprocal relationship, as you're saying, and you will not have the time and energy to give that to everybody as well as yourself. Mm-hmm. So you do need to limit the people that you're really letting into your inner circle. I mean, I don't share my work with more than 2 or 3 people when it's still in the beginning stages, because you have to make sure that it's a two-way street, that relationship, that you are also, that they are giving you feedback and you have the time and the attention and the energy to give them feedback. And the other thing I wanted to say, Deesha, is that I love that you had the guts to just cold email that columnist, because I feel like I really respect it when somebody takes the time to reach out to me on a limb. I know that they're putting themselves out there. And I think the only thing that bothers me in that situation is if that person has not taken the time to actually practice the craft of writing yet.
Yes.
So when I get someone, I had a colleague from back when I was teaching reach out to me a few months ago and say, hey, I just went through this really hard thing, and I think I want to write a book about it. Could I pick your brain for a bit? And my response to her was, okay, what have you written so far?
Yeah.
She said, oh, well, nothing. I haven't started it yet. I just wanted to hear about blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you need to write this first, and then I can talk to you about it. Yes. But it's that idea of don't start with that end goal in mind. You have to fall in love with the process of writing. You can't just be thinking about the finished book and the publication. I love who was it that said it to you, that you need to focus not on publishing, but on getting.
Deborah Dickerson. Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, that's the goal that I set for myself with each book is how do I take myself to the next level?
Yeah. And I think that's tricky too, because I keep waiting for somebody to bust me on, you say you want to help writers and you didn't help me, but I think it is what you said. We have to be discerning about, how much time we can give, because we have to do our own work. And I'm going to give the time and energy I have to people who recognize that writing is work, and that they've done it. And I think it's Toni Morrison and probably some other folks too that have distinguished between people who want to write, which is to really do the work, and people who want to have written, which there is a difference. And we, Tamara, who I mentioned, she and I have gotten a lot of inquiries over the years from people who basically want us to tell them the magic, abracadabra thing that you say to do to write successfully. And we have always tried to be, supportive and helpful. And finally, we just created a document that boils down to, it's a lot of work, but we break down the work that is involved. I had jotted some things and she put it all together. And so she started sending it to people who, really just want the magic. And she never hears back from them, not even a thank you, So it's a nice kind of litmus test, or filter.
I think we've
Yeah.
all been in that situation at like a cocktail party where you say you're a writer.
Oh yeah, me too.
Somebody's like, oh, I always thought about writing a book. I've had a really interesting life. And my litmus test is if somebody talks to me about writing, if they have a kind of like fear and reverence about it, then I know I can take them seriously because I know that it's something that's like near and dear and they desperately want to do it, versus someone who approaches it in kind of like an offhand or arrogant way where they're like, oh, I might do that sometime. Because it's what you're saying, it's so much work. But I've talked a lot.
Nobody's like, I want to be an eye, I would like to practice eye surgery, like nobody says that ever. It's not
Right.
so much.
I thought about getting into real estate law, maybe. Like, I might mess around and do that.
Something I wanted to add to this is, even if you are approached by like somebody who's seems very serious and is doing the work, etc., you're not going to have all the energy in the wheel. And so much about this is about curating your own energy, because it's not just about the work you need to do and the reciprocal work you need to do for them. It is about making sure also you're having, like, we've said it a million times, especially in the pandemic, your home life, work-life balance. Because if your situation and your mental health starts to suffer and you are not protecting a lot of your personal relationships in your own life and all of that balance, your mental boat is gonna get swamped really quickly, because it's such a because writing is work. But I don't necessarily, I try to think of it less of, because it's not a hobby, but also I think it's not quite a job, because a job has 401k benefits and health benefits, and we don't have those. So I try to think of writing more as you're starting a small business, where you and your work are the product you're selling. You don't have a physical storefront, but this is your small business. And in a small business, you are putting a lot of time and a lot of your own money and resources in upfront. And it's going to be a while before you start getting back into black on that. So I think, to that end, like, it's just so important to just really be mindful for that reason. And to what Kelly and Deesha were saying, like, you really can kind of only put that energy into a few people. But if you do that, that's, it can be one of the best relationships you have in your life. But yeah, even if like, because you're going to run into so many deserving people. There are so many, and again, you never know, like, someone who comes, like, I came at this business all like, oh yeah, I was thinking of turning the blah blah blah, like, I came at it super flippant at first, and it took many patient people, probably, and a lot of people that I'm not even aware of, rolling their eyes at me behind my back, deservedly, before I did the work enough to get to that point. But you're going to run into a lot of really cool people who are really serious, really talented, really have the work, and you're just not going to have time for them. So I think it's really important to do that internal work and decide for yourself, like, what you're able to commit to. Because, if anyone's like me, I have a real hard time saying no, because I think it's cruel to say no, but you're doing yourself and them a big disservice, if you're not able to adequately water that plant.
100%. That's such a hard lesson to learn, I think, especially when you realize you're far past the boundary point of being utilized, overexerted. Not a great feeling. Okay, so when it comes to the community of your audience, like, how much time have you spent, like, I guess, investigating it, being a part of it? Like, how important is it to understand the audience as a community, the audience space, and how does that inform your work or your choices, or how you approach what you might write?
I'll take a shot at that. It's a great question. I think for me, my friend Dontiel Moniz, we were on a panel and someone asked about, who she saw as her audience. And, she said she's her first audience. And I love that answer because I feel like I am too, that solitary part when we're writing and it's just us. And I think about, what do I want to see more of and what holds my interest? And so I'm typically writing, Black women characters. And so lately I've just been really enthralled with messy Black women characters, right? So I'm thinking about Raven Leilani's Luster, Black women who are allowed to, make poor choices, also writing Black women in situations beyond what culturally is prescribed, that we're not your mammies, we're not these archetypes, we are everything and everywhere. And so I like exploring that. So, some of my writing that's in process right now, I'm playing around with a little bit of horror and playing around with satire. Fran Ross wrote a book called Oreo in 1974, and that's the first satirical novel by a Black woman, and we haven't seen a lot since then. And so I'm really interested in, satire that centers Black women. So I'm hungry for that, and I assume others in my audience community are too. I hope so.
I feel the same way as Deesha. I intentionally do not try to think about what my audience would want or what's hot in the market or whatever. I love that quote, and I forget who said it, but it's write the book that you would rush out to the bookstore to buy. And if I am working on something that I cannot say that about, I shouldn't be doing it. I think that readers ultimately recognize authenticity. And so I want to write a book that I am authentically passionate about and interested in and curious about. And I think that those stories always find their audience. And you really can't predict an audience, you can't play to the market. And for what Adam and I do, which is YA, it can almost be patronizing to try and write to teenagers because they're going to end up making fun of us anyway. Like in my second book, I got made fun of a few times online because one of my characters referenced Tumblr, and all these Gen Z kids were like, oh, like, it's so lame, like blah, blah, blah. And which is funny because I wrote that because I use Tumblr. But anyway, I think you have to just write a book for yourself. First and foremost, you have to be your first audience.
Yeah, like been there on that. It's hard because again, you can't really write to trend. You can't really put, especially like in YA, especially, you can't really write something that's like super timely right now because again, the publishing process, if you're going, especially if you're going traditional publishing, if you sell a book from the moment you go deal, it's going to be like 2 years before another human being is going to pay you money for that book. So like the world's going to think of where we were 2 years ago. Stuff's different. So it can be very tricky to do that. And so, like, Deesha and Kelly were saying, I tend to write the book, for me also because it's been my whole like life's thesis, to sort of to be in these situations where I always think, well, I'm the only one who likes this thing, or I'm the only one who thinks this way, or I'm the only one who feels this way, or I'm the only one who's, fill in the blank. And then the story of my life is like, oh, I immediately meet 50 people who also like that same weird thing, or also like, oh, they agree with that. I just was in the wrong town, or I was just not, or I didn't, this was pre-social media, so I didn't have access to knowing that everyone was into the same show that I was, or whatever it is. And I think that's like kind of the cool thing about being creative, is that you can put this thing out there that is so personal to you. And I can't remember who came up with the original idiom, but it's, you know, the more personal something is, the more universal it feels to others. So, you know, I think the more broadly you write something, the less of yourself that you put in it. Potentially the fewer people are going to really connect with it. But if you make something like so personal, you know, as long as you're writing it with that authenticity, and as long as you're writing it, you know, with sort of an overall narrative in mind, and not doing something really super self-indulgent, which I've done from time to time, you know, people are going to connect to it. People are going to, someone's going to love something about it, and you're going to, you know, and, you know, I think right now more than ever is a great time to learn that about your audience and your readership, is, you know, because of social media, people are able to reach out to you more comfortably. You know, people who are maybe who are shyer or more averse to kind of putting themselves out there. If it was like a one-on-one, if they had to come up to you in a physical conference and come to your table and take up time and space and go, hey, this really meant a lot to me. It's an uncomfortable place to be in for a lot of people. But something that I discovered through when I did my virtual launch party for my debut was so many people who were in those breakout rooms, who were in that virtual signing line that we did, were like, this is amazing. I've never gone to a signing before, or an author event before, because they're either not in my town, or they don't come out here, or, you know, I have too much social anxiety to do this, you know, in person, but this is, you know, way more comfortable. You know, and we all have, you know, different comfort levels. I think there's like different comfort levels even within this, you know, webinar right now about, you know, that sort of thing. So I think that's something where, you know, definitely, I would never say write to trend. I would always say be aware of what is, you know, I'd say it still benefits you to be aware of what is selling and what kind of is popular and what sort of are the broader trends that might be around for a while. But if you're writing to just hop on some bandwagon, by the time you're aware that it's a bandwagon to hop on, your book's not going to make it to that point. Like, it's not going to be on there.
Those are really great insights. Thank you for that. So we're getting a lot of questions, and so I think maybe now would be a good time to pivot over to our Q&A time, because we have a lot of really good questions here in the chat. Crystal asks, she's found it very difficult to find like-minded people, like-minded writers. Do you all find a lot of people who act super superior to you, and how do you handle that? Personalities, how do we handle that?
I have an answer, but I also know Jacinta hasn't gotten to speak in a few minutes. So if you want to start, go for it. Okay. Simple answer, do not hang around someone who acts superior to you. Pardon my French, get the hell away from them. You should be hanging out with other people who are curious about what they're writing, are curious about other writers, and who approach this with some grace and some humility. And if somebody is acting like they're better than you, that's their own shit that they're dealing with. That has nothing to do with you. You need to get away from there. It's going to suck your energy out. And yeah, I won't answer the second part about where to find like-minded people, but stay away from the superior, arrogant, you know, white guy in your MFA type of people.
Yeah, 100%. It's very, the good thing is those people, you can spot them really easily. So they make themselves very, very known. And I think that's kind of something that unfortunately, you know, we do deal with a lot of, and we all have our own internal, you know, judgment calls that we make, or we think this is going to be, you know, but it's one of those things where like, even from just a normal human being, just be cool perspective, it's also just like, it's just bad business because like, again, you never know who's going to be up and then who's going to be down, especially if you're in YA. The turnover there, the up and down turnover there is pretty quick. Like even something where my friend Julian Winters, who's a wonderful writer for he did Running with Lions, and he's got another book coming out in the spring. But he and I both started as these very scrappy, independent published LGBTQ YA authors who just were at all the events and were just super in everyone's community. And then everybody liked us, but we were published by like very, very, very indie imprints. And then now next year, both of us are going to be published by Penguin. So it's like, you never know who's going to be, and not that I say like that's up and like that independent publishing is down, but like there's plenty of people who are like, we're going to give you dust because, you're at this house that is not as big as the ones that I think should be like paid attention to. And it's like, no, you should be paying attention to everyone who is getting work out there right now, because, independent houses are kind of where a lot of the chances get taken. So you're missing out on some really great books if you don't, if you just only read big four published books. And just in general, like, it's just, aside from you're not being a cool person if you kind of treat other people differently that way.
And I'll plug the university press world. My book was published on West Virginia University Press. It was sent out to, the big guys as well. I only got one offer on my book, and it was from WVU Press, and I'm really proud of that. And I'll also add, in terms of where you can find folks, like-minded folks. I hope everybody's continuing to take workshops and classes and learning. I still am. I'm sure my colleagues here still are as well, because part of, I think, being a strong writer is the curiosity, and learning never stops. You never feel like I'm superior, I have arrived. I'll be like taking a workshop for an entity, a bookstore, or some other Catapult or someone. I'll take a workshop, and I just taught there like the week before, or I've taken workshops with people who have been my students, and we're like that Spider-Man, meme, looking at each other like, what? But I share that to say that in those workshops and classes, usually when some magic has happened and people really connect and there's this great sharing, nobody wants it to end. So it doesn't have to. You can set up a Slack channel, like that's happened with a workshop that I taught and a workshop that I was in, where people just wanted to stay together and stay in touch. And so they just created Slack channels, and people use it to vent, to share opportunities, to have virtual coffees just to check in for accountability and for all sorts of things. So using those workshops as a way to find folks. Also social media, Twitter, make it work for you and reach out. And sometimes I think we're waiting for people to start something that we can be a part of. Don't hesitate to start something yourself and invite other people to be a part of it. You might be surprised who says yes.
Deesha, we have a piggyback question for you. When is Secret Lives of Church Ladies going to be on HBO?
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.
All right.
No, it's a long timeline, and I'm actually grateful for that, because it's just incredible working with HBO Max and with Tessa, and their focus is on something fantastic rather than something fast. And so I have a co-writer, Tori Sampson. We could finally announce her recently, and we've just been in the process of starting to build a world. So there's a lot of pre-writing, I guess is the best way to put it, and pre-thinking and planning and conjuring that happens before you even write the pilot. So I can tell you that we have not written the pilot yet, so you can sort of extrapolate from there, and that this is a process that we're really wanting to get right rather than get fast. And I think that that's a good, good rule of thumb for us in just our writing lives in general. Whether it's a rush to finish a story or a rush to get published for the first time, you know, the rushing, I just don't think ever serves the writing, doesn't serve the story, doesn't serve the characters, in my experience. The oldest story in my collection is probably 6 years old, meaning from the time I wrote a sentence that became a story, you know, years later. So, you know, slow and steady definitely wins the race.
All right, we have a question for Jacinta. How does your journalism background in interviewing help you write dialogue?
Oh, that's a great question. It helps quite a bit. I think, you know, the writing is very different for journalism and then for writing books. But some of the same basic principles of writing kind of apply to both. You know, I understood when I wrote my first book, I already had a strong understanding for story structure. I knew like what a myth, I didn't, you know, a lot of writers have to kind of like plot out and really kind of get an understanding of how a story should be structured. And I kind of already had that from writing my journalism experience. And then also in terms of dialogue, you know, I listen a lot, obviously, as a journalist. So I hear and watch people a lot. I see your tics. I see how you move when you say something. I hear the inflections of your voice. I understand that you don't speak sometimes in complete sentences. You know, so I was able to kind of, you know, having transcribed a gazillion hours of interviews over the course of my career, you know, you start to pick up on those things naturally. I didn't even realize I had picked it up, honestly. But yeah, so it's helped a lot in terms of dialogue. And then, you know, also, I don't necessarily read my dialogue out loud, but I kind of read it to myself and listen. I write in like a cadence. And so you can hear when your dialogue sounds off or when it sounds unnatural. So it helped. Yeah, my journalism background helped quite a bit, just in understanding the cadence of speech and what's realistic for people to say, and especially in specific situations, because you might speak a certain way in one situation and speak one way around a certain group of people, and then a completely different way, obviously, around other groups of people. And so, you know, your level of comfort affects the way that you speak. So yeah, it's helped quite a bit.
So here's a question for the group, and this is kind of in the same vein as dialogue and code switching. Where do you all find your character voices? Do your characters often tell you what they want to do, and is it sometimes something other than what you had planned for them?
Well, I start with character. That's usually the basis of my books. I know some writers start with a plot. I'm very character driven, and so my plots are usually built around who this person is and what's realistic for their life and like what they would be going through at this particular point in their life. And so yeah, so I've had characters. When my characters stop speaking to me, the book stalls. That's when I get blocked. And so I've had books where I was writing and I was like, oh, okay, this is going to happen. And then as I continued to develop the character and got to know the character even better, it was like, this isn't realistic for this person. And so I've had to like go back and like restructure. So, you know, like I said, because I'm a character driven writer, they play, you know, that's hugely important to my writing process.
All right. So we got a couple more questions in here. A couple of procedural questions. At what point do you engage sensitivity readers, if that's part of your process?
I'll take that. So I am in the process of, I just was speaking with my editor for a future book the other day, and so we're going to engage a sensitivity reader on this upcoming book that I'm drafting. And it's one of those things where the answer really is, you know, as often as possible. And you should do it if you have, you should also do it when you have the funds to pay a sensitivity reader, because that's very, very essential to do that. So when the funds were available for that, we immediately were like, okay, well, let's engage a sensitivity reader in that, because we've got you know, a prominent character in my next book who's Latin, and they're from, you know, when you're doing that from a character's point of view, especially if you're writing a point of view character, I think that's very important. I think it's also very important to kind of know when you should maybe rethink something rather than send it to a sensitivity reader, because a lot of times you don't want to just like hand a sensitivity reader something that's extremely messy and just go, here, approve it, or here, give me notes on this, because that can be a lot of labor, physically and emotionally. So I think the thing is, if you're considering sensitivity reads, it would be, make sure you can pay them, make sure you have really, really, really gone through it, and that you're not giving them a first draft. I think making sure many people have also seen it beforehand, especially if you're in a house where there's an editing team who's looking at it. So you're showing them something pretty finished, but also not so finished that, like, if they bring up really big structural issues or like really big overarching stuff that you need to gut and change, there's still plenty of time to do that, because you need to be, when you're doing that, you need to be extremely open to the fact that, like, you may have gotten this wrong from the inception. Because a lot of times what we're seeing with sensitivity reads is a lot of people sometimes are using it as rubber stamps to just be like, oh, well, we gave this out, and, you know, and someone said it was okay, so don't get mad. When it's like, no, you, like, the whole concept of this is really broken. So it's really personal. So just early on with the money, but also, you know, try to be cool to the sensitivity reader and not hand them a big mess.
I
And
would
also,
also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jacinta.
I was just going to quickly add that in some cases, you need to also consider if you should be the one writing the book in the first place. Just because something is a great story doesn't mean that you are the person to tell that story. So you also might want to consider that as well.
And piggybacking on the question about sensitivity readers, for those of us who aren't working with a publishing house that has these people in-house, where do we find these folks?
I was actually going to address that. My advice is, don't wait for the publisher to do that part for you. If they're going to do it at all, take it upon yourself. So for my most recent book, She Drives Me Crazy, which is a romantic comedy, Scotty is the narrator, Irene is the love interest. And Irene is an Indian American queer teenage girl. And I did a lot of buying my Indian and South Asian friends coffee and listening to them and learning about, like, what region of India should Irene's family come from? What religion would she be? What languages are spoken at home? Things like that. And as Adam is saying, I did pay my friends as well. So like my friend Sana, who is a PhD student, I paid her a couple of times to read through the book and give me really hard feedback. And it was also important to me to engage my friends as sensitivity readers, because I knew that they wouldn't spare me. You know, I would essentially send them a draft and say, tell me what I got wrong. Like, what am I missing the mark on? What am I blind to? And it's also important, I think, to have multiple sensitivity readers. Like, I wrote an Indian American character, but I didn't only rely on one Indian American person's experience. I worked with 4 different Indian American friends of mine. And they all bring different things to the table, and they were all from their families are from different parts of the Indian subcontinent, and one of them's Muslim, one of them's Hindu, one of them's Catholic. And it's really interesting the things that you will not know if you don't come from that shared experience. So, for example, my friend Annie Jacob, who is an Indian American actress, she read one of the drafts, and there's a scene where Scotty and Irene walk into Irene's home on Christmas Eve. And Annie stopped me when they're coming in the door and she said, they need to take their shoes off. Like, you wouldn't, like Irene's parents would not be okay with them just walking in the house without taking off their shoes. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And that's one of the things that Indian American readers have actually pointed out to me. They're like, oh, that was so authentic. And, I'm like, thank you. I can't take credit for that. So I think the best thing to do is get yourself out of the way and defer to the people who know what they're talking about and honor their experiences and realize you are not entitled to those experiences, which is part of why you should pay sensitivity readers, because you're saying, I value your time, your energy, your attention to detail. I appreciate what you're doing for me. But ultimately, take it upon yourself. And you know what? When I pay my sensitivity, when I pay my sensitivity readers, I keep receipts of that and I make note of that when I file my taxes, as like, because writing is a business, and that's one of my expenses, is making sure that a book is authentic. And so you do need to be paying for that yourself. But remember that you shouldn't, ultimately don't rely on a publisher or some higher up power to do that work for you. You are ultimately the guardian of your story.
And that's a good way to, like, back to what Jacinta was saying, like interrogating yourself. Should you even be writing the story? A big clue, if you should be right, one of the big clues is, do you have anyone in your close friend social circle who is that marginalization you're writing? If not, that's a pretty big clue of, like, maybe you don't know what you're talking about. Like, like if you have nobody in your social group like that you could even run a gut check off of in a text message about, here's the pitch of the book, like, if you can't even do that, if you have no one who's at least that level of closeness with you, it's that's in the negative column, I would say.
Yeah, I would just add, and I'm saying this as someone who has been a sensitivity reader, building on what everyone has already said. I think the question is, am I doing harm? And I teach a workshop on this about writing experiences other than your own, and it's called First Do No Harm. The problem is, if you don't have that proximity and that knowledge, you don't know if you're doing harm. You don't know what you don't know. And that's why this is really, tough ground to tread on. One of the things that I ask of people who ask me to be a sensitivity reader is to understand that part of my process is that I'm going to ask you to interrogate your motivations, your why for wanting to write this, and to be able to articulate that for me. And I had a great experience. Well, I mean, it was great for me. I hope it was great for her, with a writer who had written a short story. And just the process of her answering my questions about her intentions and motivations, she realized her intentions and motivations were this. The story she had written was something else entirely. And so just from our conversation, she was able to say, I'm going to scrap that. And if this is what I'm trying to do, then I know that I need to do better.
Hey everybody, this has been such a great conversation. We are up on our time here, so I want to be respectful to all of the panelists' time and yours. So there's a few questions we didn't get to answer live. We'll continue this conversation over in Slack, so I'll post those questions over there. We had a question about paying sensitivity readers, and then one about timing and structuring for critique groups. So we'll try to address that afterwards. But thank you all so much for offering all of your wisdom today. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you.